first of you, sorry, I missed your names. The first two of you there with ACE. There's been a lot of questions, especially early on in the hearing today, on the perspective of the students. There was somehow almost this like implicit bifurcation between a parent's interest and a student's interest. I don't really see that divergence there, to be honest with you. In terms of if we should, as policymakers from the state, align our interests with that of what I think is the interest of parents, which is maximizing student educational outcomes. What has, in your experience, been the impact on students and their families who have chosen to take advantage of ESAs?
Absolutely, I can answer that. So in my experience, we do have actually students that are here to testify and students that have spoken out. Of course, maybe not the 5-year-old students, but as students get a little bit older and they're empowered to speak out about their experience moving from a public school to a private school, if that school was not serving them properly, they're excited about their future, excited about the potential that they have, whether that is college bound or not. We have experienced students moving into trades or going right into the workforce after utilizing an education scholarship account.
Have you seen students that were having academic challenges at the ISDs have more academic flourishing in a private or other type of school?
Absolutely, and it doesn't even come down just solely to academics. I've experienced students who were experiencing bullying in their public schools, and so their parents made the difficult decision to switch them, but ultimately the students wound up flourishing because they were in an embracive and inclusive environment.
Yeah, so so real quick on that, because we talked about education, like that's obviously most important, but there are other factors going on that could contribute to a student's success, such as bullying or others. I mean, a well-to-do parent, a family with significant financial means, if their student is experiencing bullying or academic challenges in their school, what does that family do?
They move to a different school.
Yeah,
they have the choice.
Right, so they could move, right? Because right now school choice is relegated through housing markets in Texas, which is, I'll pose it as a question, is that a terribly equitable way to be allocating education resources?
Not particularly when you see a student that's not thriving in that educational environment.
Right. So what are some of the reasons, so you mentioned a couple, I mean, what are the reasons parents leave? Because I've asked this to several witnesses today, and I basically have been given some kind of a variation of parents don't know any better, they're incompetent, or they fell prey to propaganda, or the government should choose for them. Why, in your experience, do you see parents switching from public schools to take advantage of ESA programs?
The number one reason is bullying. That is the one reason why they leave. They obviously care deeply about education. They care many times also about faith for their kids. But the number one reason comes down to bullying, where they can be in a safe environment. I also want to be very clear. We are not anti-public schools. People think we are. That is a misnomer. We are not. I'm a proud product of a wonderful public school, and it served me very well. We are anti-mediocre education, and the education that does not serve a child well, which is not good for the state of Texas and for the United States of America. That is what we are against, and that's why we seek to have every single child in America have a great education that's world class.
100%. Couldn't agree more. In fact, I would argue that competition in education would do in education what it does to every other sector of our economy, which is over time you should see quality improve. In addition to prices going down, unfortunately, we see the exact opposite in education. But yeah, no, to be pro-public education is to be pro-school choice. Do you think, because there have been many witnesses say something to the contrary, do you think parents are capable of making the best decision for which educational setting would be best for their child, or are they not capable of that?
Absolutely. I have full faith in parents, and I'm hard-pressed to identify any parents in my teaching career that didn't have the best interests of their students at heart. Many of the passionate parents that spoke today are speaking out precisely because of that, because they have the best interests of their child at heart.
50% of our families that are served in our program are Hispanic families. Many of our families are immigrants from other countries. We have families who are African Americans at a very high percentage. These are families who are looking for a better life for their child, and these parents will do anything it takes. And when I first began working at age 22 years ago, I remember being in one of our African American schools and hearing the pastor address the students and saying that I recognize the challenges you face in your neighborhood, but we are going to educate you and make sure that we prepare you so that when you go back to your neighborhood someday, you're a contributing member to your neighborhood, not a person who's taken. And that is really the essence of what we do, is empowering families to do great things for their kids.
Yeah, and I'm actually glad you said that. I've heard so many apologists today for the government education monopoly, proponents of keeping kids trapped in failing schools, make the argument that, you know what, because an ESA isn't equal to, you know, the full price of student funding. So in Texas, for example, it's around $15,000, $16,000. Most of the ESAs that have been contemplated in Texas are $8,000, $10,000, $12,000. They make the argument that, well, this is only going to benefit the rich. This isn't possibly going to help benefit low or middle income families. Do you have any response to those critics?
Sure. You heard the panel earlier talking about the state of Utah and the launch of the ESA program. When the ESA program was launched in Utah, there were close to 30,000 parents who expressed an interest in the program for their kids. And as you heard today, the 10,000 students who are benefiting that program are from the lowest income sectors. So when we hear people say this is a program for the wealthy, it's just not true, because that is not the case. You have the lowest income kids in our program that are benefiting. If you're a wealthy family, you're not looking for a government handout. As a wealthy family, you will do whatever you want from the neighborhood you live in. That is not your priority in your life. But it is a major priority among the lowest income parents who are desperate, who are stuck.
So are you basically saying wealthy families have school choice right now?
Absolutely.
Poor families do not. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah. So what about, final question, there has been said and asserted just as gospel fact, more times today than I could possibly count, that school choice would destroy public education. In the states you've operated in, or in any of your observations of ESA programs anywhere across the country, in any of the states where parental empowerment and education freedom have passed, have the public school system been, and again, I'm going to use their words, been destroyed?
None. And that's a fact.
And funding has increased in those public schools, and the per pupil revenue per child has also increased when you have school choice programs. And our belief is that all boats rise. We want our public schools to flourish and be great. I know there's a debate here in Texas as well about our rural schools. And we recognize there are not as many private options out there. But if you still empower families, whether it's homeschool or private school, let a parent choose and do what's right for them. And our belief is that if a public school is serving their kid well, you're not going to leave. Because why would you leave a system that's serving you well when your education is already top notch?
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Representative Hinojosa.
So I'm a little bit confused about this Vermont program because it's a year old, and I hear it's a universal program, but then at the same time I hear it's limited to kids who are economically disadvantaged. So I want to kind of take that out of the equation because it's a little brand new program. Other than that program, please name for me which are the programs, which states have a universal taxpayer-funded voucher where most of those taxpayer-funded vouchers don't go to kids who are already in private schools. Which states?
So just to clarify, the Utah Fits All Scholarship Program is universal, but there's clear prioritization for lower income students. So while it is a universal program, the legislature has appropriated for us to prioritize students that are 200% or below the federal poverty level first and foremost.
Okay. But maybe you and I have a different understanding of universal. Let's put that small program aside. Mm-hmm. And any other state that has a universal taxpayer-funded voucher, what state doesn't have a majority of the families that were already in private schools?
Arizona.
Arizona doesn't.
West Virginia.
Okay. Arizona and Arizona, where they are facing now over $1 billion budget deficit. That's your
I don't administer
example.
That program.
Okay.
And my understanding is that data is incorrect. I spoke to someone after I heard that today, and that data we believe is false.
That data has been in every kind of credible news outlet that I have seen. So that's news to me that would be false data. I want to ask the representative from the chamber, your businesses that choose your community to live in it, and you've talked about how important it is that your community have a school district that is quality, mm-hmm. and that's an important factor in business decision and people making a decision to move to your community. We've heard one of the reasons that families choose to leave their public schools is because of bullying. Do you have any, or does your community, does your chamber have any belief that maybe what we should do is create welcoming environments for all public school students so that nobody has to deal with bullying at their public school?
Yes, I think that we would agree with that. Part of our legislative priorities as a business community is that we are also against any kind of discriminatory legislation that would alienate anyone from the workplace. So I think that would translate also to our school systems.
I think that we could really benefit from having a whole hearing on discipline in our public schools, because if that is an issue that I hear repeatedly as a concern from parents, and it seems to me that rather than give people ways out of a school system where they feel like they're not getting bullying addressed, that we should address the bullying in our neighborhood public schools. And so
I would agree, and I
be an
think it would be
advocate
very
for that.
challenging for some of our parents if that was an issue for them to leave, because I'm not sure where the schools are in Texas, that private schools that are $10,000, but I know in our area it starts out at least $14,000 onwards up to about $40,000 a year per student. So I'm kind of confused about where some of these numbers are coming from.
Representative Hinojosa, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that the bullying should be addressed, and I think discipline is a significant issue that all schools should address. There are major hurdles for public schools in their disciplinary actions, and you find in private schools that is not the case, because private schools are autonomous institutions, and so they have the ability to discipline their students, and you find that there is order and rigor, and students are successful.
I would also add to that for some families, while I agree with you absolutely about the programs that need to be in public schools, I've seen them implemented myself with great efficiency and effect. Some families can't wait. Their child is suffering, whether that's because of bullying or because of academics. They don't have the time to wait for that school to make a certain improvement if a program isn't already implemented, and that's why they're forced to make the choice to move their student to either a place in a community that they're safe or that they're going to flourish academically.
Well, I would say that no family can wait for a safe and welcoming environment to learn in, but that's why we're the state legislature. We can remove those barriers so that all students feel safe and welcome in their school environment. And that's why we're having this hearing.
I hope you can accomplish that. I think that's a lofty thing that you should be seeking to do. And I think also, if you look at an ESA bill here, I think to your question about a universal program, is you have the ability at this body to make sure that lower income families are receiving preferential treatment. Obviously, our program believes very much so in serving the lowest income families, so we agree.
All right, members, any more questions? All right, Ms. Hermes,
Yes.
So in the business community in McKinney,
Yes.
is it the concern of the impact on the public schools, or is it concern because they wish the ESA was a larger amount to match the cost of the private schools? What is the actual concern?
The concern
but if it's a
is-
workforce issue, it's about a well-trained,
That's correct, yeah. So
and that an ESA would impact.
Correct.
If kids left and learned more, that would be detrimental
two
to
things. That would be one concern, is kids leaving and the impact that could have on a school. And then the other concern is businesses are generally very fiscally conservative, and we've seen that many times, including in Arizona. I believe the data will show that Arizona, New Hampshire, and Wisconsin, anywhere from 75% to 89% of the students using vouchers already attended a public school. So while they may have prioritized and said that they were going to give low-income students the first right to apply for that, there's so many other challenges and barriers for low-income students, not just the debated amount that I think that the legislator has given before. Like I said, I mean, it's at least $14,000, in private tuition in one of our local private schools. How are the students going to get? So if you're low income, how are you going to get to school? Transportation, all the other things, all the other barriers to that.
So basically the Chamber of Commerce in McKinney is just against it philosophically.
Right. We do not believe that diverting public dollars to private institutions is the way to go.
Y'all for the Pell Grant?
I'm sorry?
Are you for the Pell Grant? Which is
we have
public dollars diverted to private higher education for workforce development and things like that. Y'all are okay with that?
That is not something that we have discussed as a board in our priorities. We have been focused more on our K through 12 and making sure that our public schools are well funded.
So any child that leaves a certain school district defunds it in essence, correct?
If the child is leaving the school district, they are taking those allocated dollars from that school.
I lived in a certain school district, and then I drove to another public school district because I felt like that was the best opportunity for my kids. Was I defunding my local public schools by getting in my truck every morning and driving my kids to another school district that accepted them and checked them out, basically, made sure they were
first of all,
academically successful, all these barriers. So was I defunding my local school district when I did that?
First of all, I've never used the word defunded. You did ask me the question. You were still funding public education going to a different school district. You had a choice, you had parental choice of where to send your kids within the public school system in the state of Texas. We already have a charter school system. There is parental choice that is already included that is governed by the state of Texas with the transparency and the accountabilities that are put into place.
Would your organization support open enrollment where a child could go to any school, any district, if the parent could provide transportation?
I do think that could be definitely something that they would support. Yes.
You realize that is basically what I did without that being in law. So it's a distinction without a difference. If a child does not go to the district in which they reside, then technically then they will not be funded on that child that doesn't show up there, correct? As long as it stays in the public sector, is that what you're saying?
That's correct. And with all due respect, I think that is how I answered your question. I didn't say you defunded school.
Well, I mean, theoretically, if a kid doesn't show up and they're, they don't go where they're quote zoned to go, then they do. I guess technically they don't receive funding for them. I just always like that argument. And I guess the other thing that I always ask is, really amongst all our public school friends, my wife's an assistant superintendent of schools in public school, worked there for 32 years. My mom is a teacher, my grandma's a teacher. I don't, what I don't understand is I don't know why we are absolutely certain with giving an opportunity, a small opportunity for kids that need it the most, of why we think the bulk of families are not going to choose their public schools. What makes them think they won't choose you? I mean, we did. I mean, most people will. And, we had a bill that funded public schools to a level they haven't been funded for in the history of Texas, and accountability reform and assessment reform and special ed funding and all the recommendations from all these commissions were all put before the body, and it was rejected because of a small number of kids where their parents could absolutely exercise their God-given right to put them in the best environment for them to learn. The young Army family in Killeen, Texas, that has 2 children with autism, that are working 2 jobs to try to send their kids to an environment where they can learn, where they can thrive, and somehow we are that is a threat to public schools. I think that is a misguided notion, and parents matter, and good schools and a well-educated workforce can look like a lot of things, and there needs to be lots of tools in the toolbox for parents. I think your businesses like lots of tools in the toolbox. I'm a business owner, 30 years. I like options, and I would hope that they would do that.
Funding for public schools?
I'm sorry?
Couldn't you just simply increase funding?
Yeah, I tried. I filed a bill to put $7 billion in public schools and over $30 billion in, yeah.
Is that enough?
What? Is that?
Texas is a leader in the economics of it all. We're 8th largest economy. Can't we fund our public schools better than being at 39th ranking in the United States?
Well,
I'm hearing about my school system that my grandkids are going to, basically having to make cutbacks because they don't have enough funding. In the 8th largest economy on earth, we can't afford. Can't you guys, as our representatives, do something to say we need more money in the public schools? I don't have anything wrong with what these guys said. I appear to be opposing that, but actually, I believe too you should try to help your kids. But the bottom line is, you guys as our representatives should be trying to make sure there's enough money that the public school succeeds. those parents are trying to go here because the public school is failing because you're not giving them adequate funds. You're underfunding our public school.
I don't believe that's the entirety why people choose to leave a public school.
Can I just leave you with one story? I met recently with one of our major employers in our community, and it was about a different program that we were wanting to start to help them when they are attracting and retaining some of the top level employees in their business, and it's kind of like a concierge program. And he said, well, with all due respect, I don't have to sell McKinney because people have already looked up your school system, and the public schools in McKinney are great. They want to move here. And he didn't say because you've got ESAs or you've got great private schools. He said our public schools. And so I think from that position, that's why it's important to our business community. And I do appreciate that there's different ways of looking at how we're going to best properly educate our workforce. But that's why our chamber does support our public schools, and we want to make sure that they are properly funded, that all the discussions that were happening today about curriculum, I thought were way more important than talking about educational savings accounts and vouchers. Let's give our parents, I'm a parent, great options by having a great school system. So thank you. I appreciate the work you're doing.
I think we can have it all. I think that the reality that you can't, that you have to pick one or the other. I don't think it's an either or thing. But I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask?
Representative Hefner.
So everybody keeps saying properly fund. What's that number?
That's a good question. And that's, I think, there are probably way more intelligent people in this room that can answer that question besides myself. But I can tell you that when you look at how much we are funding in comparison to other states, that is something that, we're not being competitive, and we're falling behind in that area. So what's the number? I don't have that number. I'm not
somebody
qualified
needs to bring us a number. Because all we hear is more and more and more. All we hear is it's not enough. We do more and more every year. That's proven in the slides given to us today. Somebody needs to bring us a number.
Be a leader. Yes, you can.
You're the
one
saying you need more money. How much?
I'm a grandpa. I don't know the number either.
I'm going to be a grandpa in October.
But listen, be a leader. You can compare us to, there's 49 other states. Compare us to one of those other states. We're at the 39th level. For crying out loud.
Everybody's going to come to us and beat the heck out of us about improperly funding our schools. Bring us a number.
That's very fair point, and I would say that's probably a better question to have asked Commissioner Morath while he was here, because he's
not a policymaker.
But he offers the recommendations to this. Committee.
I'd love to see a number.
Representative Hinojosa.
It's okay. Last legislative session and in every special session, the number that we kept hearing was the number to bring us to just 2019 spending power was an increase of $1,000 per student. Just to deal with inflation, it's gone up since then because we didn't do anything. So there was a number that we talked about repeatedly that came from the comptroller, and that was the number of last legislative session. It is more now.
Well, a lot of my schools were going to get like $1,700 per kid with that bill had passed.
I don't know which bill. I'm not sure which bill you're talking about.
The one that had the ESAs in it. The funding
one
bill.
that the chairman pulled down when the ESA got stripped.
When you all stripped the ESAs, yes.
That the chairman pulled down off the floor, that one?
When you stripped the ESAs.
Right, but we didn't get a chance to vote on that bill.
Well, you could have.
When the chairman pulls it
if
down,
you cared more about stripping the ESAs than you cared about funding the schools.
We shouldn't have stripped something we didn't believe in.
You said you wanted to fund the schools.
Well, we didn't get a chance to because it was pulled from the floor.
It was right there in the bill.
But the bill was pulled off the floor. But actually, that was not my Chairman. Okay. I wanted to correct the record.
Let's go back to the panel.
Yes, let's go back to the panel.
We'll talk
please.
after the deal.
Let's go back to the panel. For ACE, I asked which of the taxpayer-funded voucher programs don't have a majority of families that were already in private schools, and you said Arizona, and I just looked it up, and it's 75 to 80% of those families were already in private school.
I don't administer that program.
Okay, but you just offered it, and so
As a universal program. I
Okay.
don't have
The
the data
question-
for states I don't administer.
Okay,
I'm sorry,
just to be
Representative.
clear, the question was two parts. Which is a universal that does not have most of the enrollees already in private schools, and Arizona does not fit that bill.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. I was answering on behalf of the universal programs. I don't administer those.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Cunningham.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to get in on this thing late, so I'm just going to go ahead and say, when we say what is the number, we know that in 2021 the number was like 75 billion. 2023 it was over 80 billion. So if we're talking about what we cost to fund, so we're already probably talking like 100 billion. But we need to find a number. What we fund for public education, it was 70 billion in 2021, and just in 2023 it was over 80 billion. So we already know what we're talking about. It's a big number. It's a big number. But we need, as my colleague said, bring us a number. And that's talking about for all these 1,000 school districts, and everybody's getting funded differently. The main thing, and I'll end it on this, is we just need to revamp all of public ed because Robin Hood does not work. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
If you want a number in private education, I think you're talking about per pupil in Texas for public ed around 15,000. If you pass an ESA program in the state at 8 to 10,000 per student, the private schools and the money that would be used for homeschools would make a world of a difference, and that would be plenty of money to help out these kids have the education of their choice and do exceedingly well.
All right. Any more questions? All right. Representative Harrison.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, panel. Yeah, I appreciated actually my colleague up here asking about a number because we budget based on numbers, not words. And I'll tell you, all of last session when I was on this committee, I don't know how many times I tried to get an answer of somebody to define what it means to fully fund it, because the data that's often cited shows like 39, 40. It's highly misleading. It focuses almost exclusively on the basic allotment. It also doesn't factor in other things such as like cost of living and various deltas between various regions of the country. So it's incredibly a misleading number. And I also just think we need to stipulate for the record that every teacher union and public education lobbyist in the state of Texas opposed Chairman Buckley and other efforts to increase public education funding last session. That has to be stipulated for the record. But here's my question. Even if we're going to talk qualitatively for a second, like you can't define. You came here, and I appreciate it. Appreciate your testimony. Appreciate your heart. I believe you want the best for students. So do I. So does everybody on this panel. So does everybody in the Texas legislature. I believe you. But let's take we can't quantify it because you don't know the number. You came here and told us we got to raise the number. You don't know what to. You don't know what to. Not one person here today has known the number. Not one person all last year knew the number. Well, we're talking about the panel, and that changed all last session too. We had that discussion for a year. Appreciate it. If we agreed on a number that you said at X we have fully funded public education, would you support us enacting a truly universal ESA program to let every parent choose where to send their kid?
Yeah. You know,
Good.
I would like to see that the kids in Texas do well. I would like to see this group put that as a high priority, which would mean, number one, you got to fix the public education system and fund that properly.
Which by the way, everybody on this panel wants the best for our public education system. Everybody on this panel.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we
Absolutely.
I'm a grandpa. I'm not an educator. I'm hearing just by listening to social media about millions of dollars being given to certain individuals to do certain things. It sure sounds to me like a bribe. Oh, I didn't say that. So the bottom line is fix public education. And by all means, if bullying is a problem, I sympathize with this. I think that's an excellent solution. But the first thing to fix is public education.
All right, then let's close it. By the way, I appreciate you saying that if we fully funded public education, you would be allowed school choice supported. Did I hear you right?
Yeah.
Okay, I actually appreciate that. Thank you. I really sincerely appreciate that. Most people have said no to that question, so thank you. But I just got to ask one final question to the two of you here on the end, to both of you, because if funding is so important, why is it the case that when per pupil spending has been higher, education outcomes are lower? I'll phrase the inverse of that. Why is it the case that in the state of Texas, education outcomes were higher when per pupil funding was lower?
First of all, I'd like to say that our organization did support and thank the legislator for the funding that has been coming through. In 2018, the legislator did put a lot more funding into public education, and so we were highly supportive of that act. Since that time, there has been, as you all know, as we've talked to ad nauseum, the inflation and all the other things that are impacting our schools. That's, I think, where people are coming from asking for the additional funding to fully fund public education.
I hear that, but the question is, last year,
Yes.
the whole data this morning, if you could look at the last biennium that we've got the data for, this official
Yes.
government data, we spent a significant amount of money less in the prior biennium on public education per pupil, so adjusted per pupil, and yet academic outcomes on both English and in particular mathematics were higher.
So first of all,
so based on that, how is it possible
I don't know
that this
that
is
we're
purely
going
a
to agree
funding
on
problem?
the number of funding because basic student allotment has not increased. And so the numbers that you were
But
sharing
we spent a lot of time,
earlier,
but the basic allotment is less than half of the per pupil expenditure. The total amount that we have spent as a state on education has increased. It's never been higher than this. And yet when it was lower, objectively,
Right.
education outcomes were higher.
And again, the basic student allotment, which is the most flexible, that allows for the schools to be able to fund the teachers in the classroom, which we heard earlier is the number one driver for increasing student educational attainments. Is so if you're not
appreciate the
and
description of
the
the basic
other
allotment.
and the other funding that you have is good, but is also is already allocated to other aspects of public schools. There's not the flexibility to put that towards the teachers.
I appreciate it. I think we've made the point. Thank you, Chair.
All right.
I think
Any more?
your information is so isolated. I'm not sure how you did a good job.